It is another episode of Engaged In, where educators, leaders, and innovators come together to examine student engagement from every angle. This series invites you to deepen your understanding, expand your toolkit, and make meaningful connections that drive impact. Tonight, our episode is called Connecting Practices for Early Success. Oh, here we go with my only wants my mouse computer. It's okay. I'm Bridget Reith. I am an early literacy coach and Ignite engagement coordinator at Kent ISD, and my colleague.
I am Sarah Wood. I'm one of the educational technology consultants at Kent ISD. So I just wanted to go over our agenda briefly here. It is pretty similar to what we have done in the past. So just remember that this is being recorded today. And just a side note, because this is being recorded, we are not allowing AI note takers into the room so that you can watch the recording later. And the only exception would be is if you are in the room with your note taker. But if you send your note taker instead of you can just catch up with the recording. And then reminder that you must complete the form at the end to receive sketch credit for your participation today. And as always, we encourage you to use the chat liberally, ask questions, question us, question each other, so that we can learn along the way. We do have our link in the chat, or we'll put it in the chat here, and so that you can follow along on our presentation here as well. And as always, we do have the reminder or the option to double down on your sketches, where if you want to put what you learned tonight into practice, you can do that and earn another sketch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, you already got it. Fantastic. What's our connector for tonight, Sarah?
So, for our connector tonight, we are going to do a little activity that kind of digs into your mental tabs that you may have open. I will put the link into the chat so that you can access that directly. But we are going to do a Mentimeter. So, you can either click on the link that I put in the chat, or if you're following along, you can scan the QR code with your phone. And we are going to build a word cloud together. And what we are going to be putting in that word cloud here are some of those, we'll just call them open tabs, that you have in your brain right now that is going around what you need to do to support student learning, or what's just kind of stressing you out right now. Maybe it's testing, maybe it's conferences. Like, what are all those things that you're thinking about in regards to student learning right now?
Oh, Sarah, I'm learning that I can only use a certain number of words. I tried to just, I guess, write a sentence or something.
Yep, you
I
just got to
like
pick
tabs.
words. Yep. You should be able to
Yeah.
add multiple ones though.
So, all right. And Sammy, jump on in if you'd like.
Hmm.
Add to our word cloud.
And this is just kind of that brain dump of all those things you've got going on right now. Oh, I'm loving these things that are coming in. Seems like we have a lot of open tabs in our minds here right now.
Yes. I'll stop there just because I could do that for an hour.
So if you are still adding yours, by all means, go ahead and do that. And if you are watching later, still feel free to add those to the word cloud so that we can see what's going on in your open tabs in your brain there. And so I think by kind of doing this dump of our brain of what we have just kind of on our mind right now will help us realize that we have a lot of things that are going on. And sometimes it's really hard to narrow in on what we really need to focus on, or how we can make all of these things work together. So hopefully, when you leave this evening, you'll have a better idea of how that might look for you in certain areas. And so with that being said, we are just going to do a reminder on our engagement accelerators. If you don't mind moving forward there, Bridget, this has not changed. We just include them every time because sometimes we have new people who join. And as a reminder that you can always come back to this, you can click on the image to open a larger image of it in a PDF so that you can kind of dig into this after the learning where you can see, yes, I see those connections a little bit more.
And that image lives permanently on our episode guide as well.
Thank you. Yes. And so for today, out of those 5 accelerators, we are really going to narrow in on instructional moves, which are those pedagogical choices that teachers make to support student learning. So this can show up in a variety of ways. We have some that are listed on there, which are kind of our guiding things that we see, those indicators, but you may see other things. So feel free to, as we go through and you're thinking about your instructional moves, refer back to this and see if you can name what you are doing as one of these indicators that we've noted. So now for the really exciting part of our evening where we get to welcome our guest speakers to the stage here. And I would like to introduce Sammi TenHave, who is one of our math consultants here at Kent ISD, and a familiar face that you might notice, Bridget. She is joining us this evening as one of our guest speakers. So welcome, Sammi and Bridget. I'm so excited. Bridget, you can kind of take a step back from the facilitation and share your expertise. And I'd like to welcome Sammi to this because she brings a totally different perspective from the math world. So welcome, ladies.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on tonight.
Yeah, I'm excited to share some of the collaborative work that Sammi and I have been involved with. Actually, the last 2 years, hasn't it been, Sammi? I think that we've been doing this.
Yeah, so when we're speaking today, we're really going to talk about the 2 documents that live in both of our worlds when we think of those early essentials. So we have the early literacy essentials. Bridget, there's what, K3 and a new 4-5 document?
Well, actually, there's a K3, there's a 4-5 that has been recently updated, and we do have and have had for a number of years now DLEs, Disciplinary Literacy Essentials, which covers 6-12. So we really, there's also pre-K. So we cover the spectrum with those essentials, yeah.
For sure, yeah. And then in the math world, we have the early math essentials, which are pre-K5. And then, of course, we're living in a disciplinary literacy essentials as well. But we're really digging into the 2 documents of early lit essentials and early math essentials. And we just want to pose the question and get you thinking about what might be some connections that exist between these 2 documents. So we know the state has put together these great resources thinking about instructional practices. We've gotten local educators on board, local consultants from ISDs, as well as researchers, and the things that should be happening in these classrooms. But what connections might there be?
And as always, if you're able to answer in the chat, you are invited always to answer as well as ask questions. If that is not available to you, or if you're watching this as a recording, just take a moment and think about that, what you know and what connections might exist between these 2.
And I think it's fair to say too, Bridget, that if they're struggling to find connections, that's an okay place to be.
Yeah,
because we're going to learn those tonight.
Yeah, it is a tiny bit of it, right, Sam?
Yes. We're scratching the surface.
Yes. And so as Sarah mentioned, with all the tabs that are open in our heads at any given time, both professionally and personally, sometimes in a teaching situation, you feel like you have all of these different competing frameworks that you need to answer to. You've got district curriculum, you've got content standards, you've got these essential instructional practices things that Sammi just referred to. And to be thinking about how do I sort this? How do I categorize it? How do I prioritize it? Can be really overwhelming in the midst of everything that you need to take care of and attend to in the course of a day. So it helps a little bit if we first think about what are those 3 separate things, what are standards, what does it mean when we say curriculum, and what is this essential instructional practices thing? You may be familiar with all of these things. The practices may be something that you're less familiar with. They exist to help you do your job to the very best that we can do it. But it can be confusing to know where to put your attention. So if we think of standards as being those targets, that is what we need to teach to students. Our curriculum is really just the tools and the resources. We often find that we start with curriculum because that sort of consumes our PD and our conversations and our daily, I got to print this or I got to put this on a slide. These are the things I'm presenting to my students. But curriculum is really just tools and resources to teach the learning targets. The practices are the pedagogy. They're the how are we going to teach these things? What are the best practices that we know to get this learning to students in a way that they will be engaged and that they will retain it? So rather than start with curriculum, I want to encourage you to really always start with what are my targets? Now, what's the very best way to teach them? So think into your pocket full of pedagogy. And again, these guides are out there for you for literacy and math to help you think through, these are the high leverage practices. This is what I should be doing. And then go to your curriculum and see, now what do I have here to be able to do that? If you're a classroom teacher, K-8, if you're self-contained, if you're even partially teamed, you may be with you need to work with both of these, right? You might be teaching math and literacy. Many elementary teachers are, and some middle school teachers are as well. So if you are having to think through, I've got my standards, I've got my practices, I've got my my curriculum materials for both of these are massive right here. But it might not just be these. You might also teach science. And so you're looking at NGSS frameworks. You might also be a social studies teacher with your C3 framework. You might teach some health or social emotional learning alongside the Michigan model, or you might even have some of that technology piece in and using the ISTE standards. That can be a whole lot. And you are not alone if you feel like that's a whole lot. We've had a lot of people that we've talked to that feel the same way. And Sammi has an interesting story to tell about somebody local who came to you with a very similar question to this.
Yeah. So when the early math essentials came out, people felt like, oh, here's another thing I have to teach, right? Not seeing it as an enhancement to what we're already doing and those things that we want to see every day in your early math classroom, but like, here's something else I have to do. So there was a district coach in Kent County who reached out and said, is there something out there that could help support my teachers and I understand what might be some similarities between these two documents? Where can we dig in and see commonalities so it doesn't feel like two separate things working in silos, but truly like what are some high leverage things we can do to condense it down, make it more digestible and not as like another document. So with that, our ISD team with math and lit got together. So we had an educational consultant, early literacy coaches, and a math consultant, and we said, okay, we have this problem of practice. And if one coach reached out, I'm sure there's many more people out there who are feeling similarly. So we investigated an in-depth crosswalk with these two documents and came up with a facilitator guide for how could you and your team look at the math essentials and the literacy essentials and find some commonalities, find some high leverage points of, okay, what can we do to make this come to life where it doesn't feel like two separate things, but really a cohesive idea, right, with instructional practices, no matter what you're teaching. Bridget, what might you add on to that experience as a group?
Yeah, I actually brought this up at a statewide coaching meeting. I was in a room where something like this was being discussed, and I shared that we did this. And I think somebody said, "Oh, well, do you have a list? Like
Right.
what's the condensed little list?" And it's not it doesn't work that way, which is why we ended up deciding on a facilitator guide because it's going to be different in each context. So depending upon your district or building goals, depending upon the student populations that you are teaching and their needs, depending upon, potentially the curriculums you are using, it's going to possibly look different. But we created a guide to be able to do that thinking work and pick out the really high leverage practices that are going to support across those very large content areas.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some things today that came out of that, but we also want to invite you, if that is something that you in your district or someone might be interested in, just perusing or possibly having a group and working through that yourself. It's a pretty I think eye-opening is how I found it. It was a very eye-opening.
Yeah.
And
I think you nailed it spot on, where it wasn't necessarily the outcome or the final product of that work. It was working together and getting messy together and exploring these documents together. So it was truly that time that elicited some of those connections and deepened our thinking.
And I think within groups, it can also really help you land on your shared goals and values for your students.
For sure. Yeah.
Find my mouse here. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So
all right. So that's the why. Right? Yeah. That's the why we thought this would be a good idea.
So when we were doing that crosswalk between those documents, we really landed on the values. So early math, if you've seen this early math essentials document, on the front page of it in the right-hand corner, there's these values. And it's really what we believe about our students, our kids that are right in front of us. And we said, you know what, we're going to ground ourselves in these values because truly we know that our values and beliefs show up in our actions. So if these are truly things that we value about our kids, they're going to show up in our teaching, no matter what we're teaching. Students are at the center, right? That's what we do with what we do. So we want to value how they show up every day. And if we can enhance that, that's going to be good teaching and good learning, right? So making intentional choices in our classroom. What do we want our students to see that we value, and how can we showcase that, right?
Yeah, and I just, as the literacy person in this conversation, I wanted to say that as we looked into both documents, of course, they were written at different times, with the literacy essentials being written first and going through some iterations and math coming on board. There are values within and all throughout the literacy essentials. Many of them are kind of up in the front material, but they aren't listed quite as point by point as they were in the math essentials. So as a group, we decided that we would start here with this list of values and look to see how it applied not just to math teaching, but also across both content areas. And I think I would argue, Sammi, after doing this work, across all content areas.
For sure. Yeah. And that's what the next slide is. So we broke it down to look at those 5 values. And when you looked at each one, we could really take out the mathematics component and just fill in any content area. So the first one is valuing children seeing themselves as knowers, doers, and contributors to whatever field that may be, right? Are we historian, math, science, writing, right? Any of those things, we could fill it in. The next one is just valuing our students for their identities, right? What differences do they have, the social characters, categories that they're showing up with, and the identities they have. So valuing them as a whole. And then valuing whatever the subject area is as broad, creative, and really we talked about the collaborative piece. We want kids to be collaborating around the content, to make sense of it, to problem solve, reason through some things. So that, takes collaboration between peers. And then we value learning in a variety of ways. So it's not just one way to do something, but how can we expose students to several ways of doing something and learning through that? And then the last one is just focusing on connections, care, and authentic relationships. So as I read those, I'm hoping you're seeing like, oh yeah, we can take math out and add in whatever subject area because we're valuing our students and what they're bringing to the table.
So how does this connect with our engagement accelerators? So we've kind of already taken some steps off the diving board into these two essential documents. But we want to pause and think about how are these two documents connected with the accelerators? The idea of practices, the idea of values.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, when we pose that question, what comes to mind for you?
When I think about it, my instant reaction goes to first asset-driven teaching and then second student-centered learning around those. Because I think these are two areas that our students struggle with, and it's hard to make connections with some of those difficult concepts. And that when you can work in their interests, their needs, and things like that, and really bring their assets to the conversation, I think it can be like really kind of a game changer for them and how they're approaching that difficult content with something that they're familiar with, something that they like.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm inviting anybody listening on either live or recorded to do some of that reflecting for yourself as well. Oh, that's those accelerators. In case you wanted to see them more close up.
Yeah, so when we think about those values, right, it's at the students being at the heart of our teaching, and then that will show up in the actions. And we're thinking about it in terms of what Sarah introduced at the beginning of instructional moves, right? The moves that we make, the intentional choices that we make that support all of our students' learning. And that's embedded in some of these things with discourse and scaffolding and providing choice and clarity, right? If students are at the heart of it, we're adjusting our instruction based on the needs of the kids sitting in the seat. So we're going to talk about two different instructional strategies today. And Bridget and I are not saying that like, hey, I bet you've never heard of this thing. But we're talking about how can we be more intentional with these moves that we're putting in front of students, right? With these shifts. Teacher moves, how can we be more intentional with it, and why are we even doing them? So the first one we're going to talk about is think, pair, share. And I'm sure all of you have done a think, pair, share before, right? But we're going to dig deeper and say, how can I make tweaks to that to make it even better, and what's my intention behind it? So when we think about think, pair, share, thinking about the values, it really lives in the students are the knowers, the doers, the contributors, right? They're collaborating together and making sense of whatever we're putting in front of them, maybe problem solving, but that's where we see a think, pair, share routine fit up within the values. When we're looking at the essentials, thinking about the early math essentials, Bridget, if you want to go to the next one, thank you. It really you could make a case that it fits in a few of the essentials, but the one that it really turns up in is essential 3, which is ensuring equitable participation for all students. So we know when a think, pair, share, the basic version, right, is you pose a question, students think about it independently, they turn and share with a partner, and then the teacher elicits student thinking. In that, all students have a voice, right? They're all thinking independently, they're all sharing with a partner. And that's the equitable participation piece of that. And then Bridget, did you want to speak to the early lit essential?
Yeah, this one actually appears in the 4-5. Oral language practice is equally important in our K3 with our K3 students. But there is a higher concentration of some of those foundational skills in the early literacy practices for K3. 4-5 and definitely up through 6-12, we see that bringing in, we have to be able to talk about. We know that as kids talk about their ideas, those are the ones that are learning. The kids that are talking about their learning are the ones that are learning. We want them to be able to manage those and to grapple with that higher order discussion. So think, pair, share is sort of the really low risk beginning of being able to talk about your ideas.
For sure. Yeah. So we looked at it from values, essentials, and then we're looking at those engagement accelerators, and it's student-centered learning, right? Providing student voice, student driven, right? And then of course, relationships, thinking about positive relationships within your classroom community, right? There has to be a level of trust and relationship between peer to peer to be able to do a think, pair, share, as well as student to teacher relationships. So when we're thinking about a think, pair, share, the first thing we need to think about is a quality question, right? If we ask, are these, is this the right answer, or yes or no questions, right? Like that is not providing time, that it's not a use of a think, pair, share, right? Because it's like, yes, no, and there's no discussion about it. There's a Dan Meyer video, and he says that no problem worth solving is like that short answer, right? Like if we want to have a problem that's worth solving, we need to dig in and talk about it. So we want to make sure that it's an open-ended question, something that can have many access points for students in order to be able to make it a discussion. The second thing is think time, right? Our wait time as teachers is such a gift to our students, but it can be one of the hardest things we do because it can make us feel uncomfortable, like, oh, sitting in silence, no thank you. But we need everyone to be able to have independent think time, right? When we have students blurt out, we always like, please don't steal the thinking time of others, right? That's so important. Yeah, McKenna said that wait time is such a challenge. Yes, and it's something you have to work on. But if you're like, okay, we're going to think for 15 seconds or 20 seconds, and like you watch the clock. I remember having to do that, watch the clock, or I would like drink my water, so I would have something in my mouth so I couldn't blurt it out, right? But it's truly a gift to our kids. The next thing is offering sentence stems. So this is something that is good for all learners. And it's often in our resources, it'll say like differentiation or supporting ML students or students with disabilities, but it's truly a gift for all because you're helping them have an access point into the conversation. So you could embed vocab in there if you want to be intentional with sentence stems, but it gives them some place to start. One thing that I was thinking about too, Bridget, is I was in a classroom and her and her class came up with this, you can't say I don't know was the title of an anchor chart. And they came up with things to say if they weren't sure about their answer. And so it was a sentence stem in the fact of like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm going to look to this poster to give me some language to put to that.
I love that because it's not only it's a language stem, but it's also a thinking stem. Like, what can my brain do in those moments when I've just got that, and we all have them.
Yeah.
So I love that that's not only that oral language stem, but also what could I think about next? The language is going to actually help me think my way into this or try the next thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Helps guide their thinking a little. And then this is like the biggest bang for our buck, right? This is why we do think pair shares is eliciting student thinking. We want to know what our students know and what they still need to know. We want to help them and support them with making connections. And they are so good at that too. If we give them time and space, students will start making connections, but highlighting those as a facilitator, as a teacher, and then helping to make our students thinking visible. Like that's the big thing for think, pair, shares. So it brings me back to the value of how are you positioning your students as knowers and doers and the thinkers, right? So early math put together this what, why, how of a think, pair, share. Some things to think about logistically before you set up a think, pair, share. Are you doing intentional partners? What are you saying? Are you starting with starter? And then kind of a checklist for the how. Just to bring this to life, if you're like, I might want to refine this practice or this move a little bit, it's a resource that we'll include on that page.
Yeah. Sammi, thank you. I appreciate the intentionality of thinking behind what and why in a think, pair, share. I think there's a point at which you begin by saying, I guess I should try this. I guess this think, pair, share thing might be a good thing to try. And then you try it and you know, it works, it doesn't work, day to day is different. But then you do start to see it working and to really be able to think about why am I doing this and what is it working on? What sorts of benefits are coming from this? And how can I then move it to the next level? I just think that's, again, we always have to be so intentional about what we're doing and to amplify each of our opportunities.
Yeah. And, it's a skill we talk about where it's like we're providing kids a lifelong skill of communicating back and forth, especially when thinking about if kids disagree with each other. Like, how do you respectfully disagree and have a conversation around that, right? In today's world, we need to do that. And we need to think critically. And that's one practice we can put into place, or one routine we can put into place to help them become like better humans, right? With communication.
Yes, certainly. And of course, we read all the reports about that technology is such a gift to us, but it also has a tendency to reduce the opportunities for those types of one-to-one, face-to-face verbal conversations. So great to have that opportunity as well. All right, so our next practice is notice and wonder. This, you're going to get a link that goes to the NCTM version of this. Notice and wonder. Math has done a beautiful job of thinking about how this fits in. But again, like Sammi said before, by removing the content area, we can see that it fits really beautifully across really any context. Adult learners, tiny learners, in-between learners. This is a very simple protocol. Being intentional about it lifts what it can do. So if we take a look at the values, again, we're pulling out that I'm going to move my little screen here so I can see this better. Thank you. The idea that we value blank as a broad, creative, collaborative discipline. So that could be literacy, could be math, science, social studies, could be fine arts, it could be whatever it is that you're involved in teaching, because we want students to have the opportunity to make sense and solve problems within that. There is sense to be made and problems to be solved in everything that we teach. So we want to be able to frame information and new learning within those opportunities. And then secondly, we value learning in this content area in a variety of ways. So not just one way all the time, but both socially variety, a social variety, and a cognitive variety. So when you bring in a notice and wonder, we're going to be asking students very intentionally to do some of their own independent thinking. They're going to have some time to, if we build it in, to share with one another in a pair or a small group, and then to discuss that in larger terms with the group so that we can start seeing some patterns in that thinking. So it really fits in with several of the values. As essentials, I'm going to start with the literacy one on the bottom. It's the same one because we're having this opportunity to discuss, but it's also about sort of those more complex ideas. So we're digging deeper into things. We're giving kids time to look, to think, and then to really exchange their ideas and talk about what's there. How about essential 3, Sammi?
Yeah, so equitable participation again, right? We're valuing all kids, and notice and wonder really provides an entry point for all students. And yes, when we ask notice and wonder, sometimes we have to say like, what do you mathematically notice and wonder, right? To narrow it down a little bit. But it truly is such an open-ended thing that they could notice the colors or the shapes, the organization, things like that, of whatever you might put in front of them. So that's why we say essential 3, because really we're including all voices and everyone can participate in this protocol.
Yeah, and our accelerators, the student-centered learning piece of it, this is very much student voice because we're asking them. We're not telling them what to notice. We're not telling them what's there. We're starting with just look at this, take a look and tell me what you see. What do you notice here? And again, with whatever guiding parameters are helpful, Sammi, like you said. And then you can also think about this under asset-driven teaching, because when we're asking kids what they personally notice, but also what they wonder, that's going to start driving your instruction in the directions that kids are thinking, along with you shaping, moving them toward the learning goal that you're driving toward. It really helps you when you're thinking and listening to kids tell you what they're noticing and what they're wondering. You can also start to see what their own perspectives and experience and background and lives bring to their perception. So, for example, maybe we're looking at a poem. Maybe we're looking at an illustration. Maybe we're looking at a map. Whatever I have, in my own experience is going to color the way that I notice and that I wonder. And so that is a really nice way to be tapping into, oh, this is a kid who must have spent some time looking at maps with their parents, or, oh, the way that this person is noticing this. So both student-centered and asset-driven, which are really woven together all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it makes me think of the value of, we value children's differences and the various social categories and identities they hold. That can come out, right, with how they're interpreting whatever it is you put in front of them.
Yes, because what I notice is not wrong. It's what I notice. What you notice is not wrong. Though they may be different, and we may want to talk about those things and how we see them and what sort of evidence we have, all those sorts of things. Yeah, thanks for that. So when you're thinking about doing a notice and wonder, very simple, you're getting something in front of students. And so it could be something they're looking at, it could be something they're listening to, it could be data as far as math and science, it could be a text in any content area, an image, media, a video clip, any of those things for all students to look at the same thing or listen to the same thing or experiencing it. And then 2 simple questions. What do you notice and what do you wonder? And silence. McKenna, man, I'm with you. I had to work for years to get my wait time game on. I wanted to jump right in. But it's really, really important that, and that's the, that's the all students have the opportunity to think. We are quiet for whatever your designated amount of time is, and to have the opportunity to capture that thinking is generally really, really, I was going to say helpful, but it's kind of critical, I think. So for kids in some way to be able to record that thinking, it can be Post-it notes, it can be index cards, it can be something, a journal, whatever you're doing, but just to keep something there so I can jot down what I'm noticing, because I'm going to talk about it. And I want to have that as a scaffold for my talking. Then turn and talk fits perfectly here. So we just take Sammi's strategy and we'll slide it right into this one. You can do that lots of different ways, of course. Another way to do this, there are, for example, I was thinking about your visible thinking example, to do a chalk talk around something like this, where students are actually posting what they notice. They're writing it silently, or maybe on a Post-it note and sticking it on some gathering chart paper or something like that. But the idea is we're getting those ideas out so that we can grapple with them and talk about them. And then to facilitate that larger group discussion, which can go in multiple different directions, of course. All right, so what can you notice? What can you wonder about? I mean, really, I could have just written the word anything here, but it doesn't really give us any ideas. You can do it with just about anything. You want the content to be narrowed enough that you can do this in the amount of time that you have for the discussion. This would not be, let's notice and wonder the entire novel of, but we might notice and wonder a paragraph, or a passage or something like that, depending upon what it is that we're trying to teach. So you can see from all of these things, this just spans any content area, and it's not narrowed. The notice and wonder part isn't narrowed unless you choose to narrow it. Notice it through the lens of, or now that we've learned this, let's go back, look at this. Now what do you notice? Yeah. Is there anything, Sammi, that comes to mind? Did I miss something on my list? There are so many things.
There are so many things. So, my team and I were just planning today for an upcoming session with adult learners, and we included a notice and wonder of something that they needed clarity with last time we were together. So, in working with different districts, we clipped a picture of some district work, and we're putting it up, and we're going to put it to adult learners for what are they noticing and wondering about this district work that's happening. So really all age ranges, any content, and what a great way to spark some thinking about whatever you're doing.
I just want to add on to that. Another thing I thought of as Sammi was speaking was just tapping into nature too as a source. If you're bringing your learning outdoors, now that it's spring, I know a lot of teachers like to get out so that the wiggles can be outside, not in a seat in a classroom, but there's so much that you can tap into even with that.
For sure.
Yeah, Sarah, I love that. And I think that I know a lot of teachers that do a serial noticing. So, they'll go out on whatever their area is, whatever the outside of their school looks like. And it could be a sidewalk, it could be a tree, it could be, whatever it is that you have surrounding your educational building to go out over the course of the year multiple times. And what do you notice today? And then now we're in the same area as we were 2 months ago. What do you notice today? And I've seen people do that in journal form or drawing. Kids are drawing what they see, and really the larger noticings of both their surroundings, breathing fresh air, yay. But then to have conversations around that, which is a really critical part of it. Yeah. Do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll give it a try. So I have an image here. I'm going to preface this before I show it by saying I also tried to integrate some of my learnings from Sarah Wood. Whenever I can, I try to participate in some of Sarah's well, everything, but lately some of the AI learning. And so I decided to play around with Gemini, and this is an image that I created. I'm not going to say anything else about it, but let's just spend, let's say, maybe a minute and a half. If you are able to see the slides, that is fantastic. I apologize if you are right now unable to see the slides, but I hope that you will be able to see those at a future date so you can take a look.
All right, so looking at this image, we're thinking, what do we notice and what do we wonder?
Yes. All right, anybody that's able, and I'm including Sammi and Sarah here, let's go ahead and enter in the chat. You could put, an N for notice and a W for wonder. It doesn't matter what order those go in, and you can put as many of either of those. So let's take a moment and enter our thinking, jot it down. I'll also be sharing it. Yeah, McKenna notices the materials in front of those learning the math strategies. I was really thinking about that too. Like the teachers have their hands on the tools that the students will be using, which seems important. 3 water glasses, but 5 people. I guess 2 people just aren't thirsty today. Why is green missing from that board? There's the notebook belong to. Only 2 people have name tags. Yeah, so the prompt that was given to AI, there were multiple iterations, Beth, of this particular image. It started out with just 2 facilitators, and I tried to describe Sammy's and my hairstyles so that they could be somewhat like us working together. It kept trying to divide us into 2 separate panels. I didn't want it. I wanted us collaboratively. It took, I think, 3 or 4 times to get us in the same room. So that was good. And then by then they had assigned name tags, which I didn't think of. And it was Sarah and Margaret. And I'm like, well, if there's going to be name tags, we might as well make them say our names. A lot of iterations to get to the point that you saw it there. Oh yeah, the people on the board in the back. I see that now too. I didn't notice that, Sarah. Yeah, I thought Gemini did a pretty good job of pulling in some of those educational topics and phrases and plastering them around in different ways. Sarah, of course, you noticed the technology with the Apple Watches. I didn't even notice watches.
Oh my goodness. I didn't either.
I know. Oh, and the 2 trainings. That's interesting. In light of how I told you, it kept splitting the 2 panels.
Yeah.
So maybe it is they're sharing the room right now. Yeah, McKenna, I wondered about that. It's very urban looking, and that could be a conference room in a school that has maybe a high-rise setup. It's a very nice conference room, it looks like. So I was wondering that too. Are they on school grounds? Are they at like a district office? Where is this happening? People seem joyful. Oh, I like the globe integration. Nice, Beth. Yeah, a few of those letters and numbers are sketchy. I also noticed that the problem-solving strategies, I think, are meant to be the exact same strategies. Number 1 and 2 are the same with maybe some weird spelling variations.
Yeah, for sure. So, Bridget, as we're thinking about notice and wonder in the classroom, you had mentioned some lit examples of like putting up a poem or a paragraph and notice and wonder, or some images maybe to spark some thinking or curiosity before a text you read. Is there anything else that you would add for how you might use this like in a lit setting?
I was actually also filtering it through content areas. As an elementary teacher, I did teach at least at some point all of the content
Yeah.
areas. And so I was thinking through, really, I was thinking literacy embedded in
Sure.
science or social studies, but also, so for example, a primary document would be something that you could take a look at together, or a section of it, or if it's an image. And again, depending upon the age of your students, gauges how much they're looking at one time. I was also wondering about looking at, for example, looking at a graph with part of the information removed, as far as like maybe the labels are removed. And so to really notice and wonder and start talking, now you're talking about really graph trends and what sort of information it shows without actually knowing the specific context. And I thought that might be an interesting preface to a conversation.
Bridget, you are spot. There is something called slow reveal graphs that is just that. And you click through, and every time you click, you're given a little bit more information about the graph, but you're having to take a peek and like reason through what could be there. Then you're given a little bit more information, then a little bit more. So if you Google slow reveal graphs, there's some for all ages and topics.
I love that.
Yeah.
It also made me think too, as you were talking, Bridget, like, and Sammy's question, like, how do you see this fitting in with the literacy? Like starting off with this noticing and wondering, and then let the students know that this is something that we are going to be reading about today. Like, what do you see, or what can you predict that might be happening in our reading today or in the book?
Yeah. And again, I think that you can put a notice and wonder and a turn and talk in at any stage of the learning. So, kind of the pre-learning and getting our brains ready. Also in the middle, where we've got a little bit under our belts and now we can start applying. And then at the end, there's really that opportunity to, okay, now let's look at another example. And now that we've done the learning, like you can start to show your proficiency and show your growing skills and also experience it as a learner. Like, I didn't know this before, but now I notice this. Now I notice the Apple Watch.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about it in the math world. They do start with it a lot of times in the warm up, right? The beginning, the launch. But I also see teachers do this when thinking about student work, right? Either partially worked examples or fully worked examples, putting that example up on the board. And what are you noticing and wondering about Sarah's math here, right? And
Yes.
focusing in on the process and where might she go next, right? Yeah, that's a fun way to use it too.
Absolutely. Great application of that.
And I did put the slow reveal graphs link in the chat in case you're interested in that. It's really fun to play around with.
Awesome. Thank you, Sammi. I am going to play around with that. Love that idea. Okay. So thinking about all of this, right? Oops. Going back. Nope. There we go. I did not want to skim right by that. So in both essential documents, the importance of assessment, and particularly in this case, formative assessment, is clearly encoded. So Essential 4 in math, Essential 9, that actually appears all the way through. K-12, we have to make sure that we are constantly understanding where our students are and where they need to go next, so that can inform and revise our instruction as we go. So thinking about these strategies, notice and wonder, think, pair, share, how does formative assessment show up, or what are the opportunities for formative assessment when we're doing these strategies?
As I'm thinking about this, Bridget, I feel like some people have the misconception when we say formative assessment, we're talking about like an exit ticket, right? An end of a lesson check-in with how are your students understanding it? Mostly in the terms of paper pencil, but like, what did they get from your lesson today? And this is making me shift and thinking about formative assessment is happening anytime we ask students questions, right? Their ongoing observation and discussion, like how did your students, what was their response to that? What was their thinking? So if I put an open-ended question on the board and have them do a think, pair, share, and I'm listening into groups to catch some themes, or when I'm having groups share out things and I'm catching misconceptions or understandings, I'm truly finding out where are my students and how I might guide them to the next thing they need, right? What do they have and where do I need to go next? Like we're making those refined teaching moves in the moment based on how they're responding to our questions, or even thinking about notice and wonder if I'm thinking like in the math world, right? That partially worked example. And I say, where do they need to go next? And my students are like, blah, 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 blah. And they get to it. It's like, okay, well, it seems like they've grasped that, right? But it's right, exactly. My work here is done. But it just feels like we're constantly doing formative assessment, and it doesn't have to be a tangible thing. It's what are we getting from the students? What do we know about their thinking?
And I think sometimes, Sammi, in the all the things that are going on, all the open
Yeah.
tabs, I think it is important and helpful to remind ourselves to be intentional about what we are doing as well. So, of course, I'm listening in. Part of that is classroom management. Of course, I'm
100%.
listening in. I ask them to talk, but maybe I ask them to think, pair, share, and I'm just sort of in the habit of checking out for a moment. Like that is my moment to take a moment. And you're missing the opportunity for some grand formative assessment there as you just even lean over, listen in. If you want to poke into a conversation, you get a massive, probably more information than you get from that little index card. Because you can hear how they're talking about it. You can hear, are they diving right in and talking about, are they hesitating? Are they using the vocabulary you want them to around whatever your content area is and this topic? And if they're not, or if that's a great way to hear some misconceptions too.
Sure.
And get right in there. And then is it one person who has that misconception? Is it 15 people? So I think we have to remind ourselves, here's my opportunity. Ooh, this is my chance to hear what's going on.
I love that. And I keep going back to being intentional, right? We talked about being intentional with a think, pair, share in terms of the question and being intentional about the share outs, right? And making that eliciting student thinking, visible student learning, right? Like making them make connections. How are we being intentional with that? Same thing with notice and wonder, being intentional on where you're fitting in the lesson based on the purpose that you're giving the notice and wonder. And then being intentional with what am I listening for when I'm anticipating students thinking, and how is that fitting with what I was anticipating, right? It's like all about that intentionality.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like that's two simple structures. Really two simple strategies, but what a wealth of opportunity and intentionality. Thank you very much, Sammi. Wow, we're going to buzz through these next few slides as we just have a couple minutes left. Sammi, what you got up here for some opportunities?
So really quickly, the Early Math Leadership Institute is happening this year. Unfortunately, it is not in Grand Rapids. It is in Lansing, but registration is open. That's there. MCTM is the Michigan Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Myself and Kelly Van Setters, who is one of my counterparts at the ISD, we are both on the board. She's the president, I'm the secretary. We have wonderful professional learning that is virtual. A lot of the time it is free or very affordable. It's only $35 a year to join. But we have like effect fluency, professional learning going on. We're talking about the science of math and research-based practices. There's a lot of good resources and learning that are often free there. And then I just linked the things that we talked about today as far as the essentials, that facilitator guide, your notice and wonder things, and the think, pair, share routine.
Awesome. Thank you, Sammi, for
You're
filling
welcome.
that
Thank
up
you.
for us. Okay, so if you watch it live or watch it recorded, make sure that you then go to that exit ticket and fill that out so that we can award sketches to you. Remember that those sketches will all come through at the end of the programming year. So you have until May 23rd to go back and to fill out any exit tickets for things that you have done. Coming up next month, we have Lindsay Lane, our innovative learning consultant. We'll be meeting with her and, oh, there it is, Sarah.
Yes, you get your chance to double down. And so if something sparked your interest tonight and you're like, wow, that is something I could try tomorrow or next week or even in the next month, go ahead and do it and submit on that form there and you'll receive another sketch credit. So for this learning period, you get 2 sketches instead of 1.
Right. And it's really you're just saying a few things about what you did. You're not submitting lesson plans or anything like that. It's just go do something and then come back and tell us what you did. Ooh, going forward, we're doing a lot of planning for next year, aren't we, colleagues?
We are.
Yes.
Exciting stuff.
Mm-hmm. Sarah's
Yes.
got a couple live things happening.
Yep. I want to again plug our AI summit. We've narrowed in on some more details and are hoping later this week to reveal our keynote speaker as well as our breakout session lineups. I'm really excited. I'm bummed that I can't attend the sessions because I'm facilitating the whole evening. So that's kind of a bummer. Another one I'm super excited about is it's called Real versus Real, where we are digging into how AI shows up in mainstream media by watching movies from a selected list and then critiquing them through an AI lens.
Very cool.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It does.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Sammi, you want to talk about what you've got?
Yeah, I
posted there?
just have one course on the books summer, the week after school gets out. So continue that learning, right? We don't want to get in the summer mode. Do some learning before you get in the summer mode. Math recovery, AVMR training, course number 1. I'm also having a course number 2 come out that will be October, November. That has not been quite put in the system yet. And then, of course, our regional programming for our Kent ISD math consultant group is Mishmi. And we are planning that. So check out Learning Stream on the Kent ISD site to look at professional development opportunities. Or you can certainly email us at math@kentisd.org if you have any questions, concerns, or wonderings.
Yeah, thank you, Sammi. And I will have
Thank
book
you.
studies posted for fall. And I did want to say that if you are listening and you are a Kent County educator, we are doing more and more work directly in district around student engagement, depending upon what it is that you have as your goals and what you're focused on. And we are really excited to collaborate. So if that sounds like something you'd like to know more about, don't hesitate to reach out to Sarah or I, and we can have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you, Sammi, for joining us this evening. And thank you, Bridget, for kind of stepping away from the facilitation role into the presenter role and sharing your expertise. I know that I always take new things away, and Sammi gave great perspective as well, thinking from the math world. So thank you for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you very much.